In this episode of Nachgefragt, I'm going to talk to Andriy Fert. Andriy Fert is an historian based in Kiev. He holds a PhD from the National University of Kiev Mohila Academy in Ukraine and is currently a lecturer at Kiev School of Economics. A few months ago, he published a very interesting research report about the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and I would like to talk about this study a little bit more with you. Andrei, who did you talk to in this study? Was it lay people, clerics, or both?
Yeah, so thank you for the invitation. And so the main thing about this study was that people mostly, when they talk about the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, they mostly focus on bishops and the interactions between different bishops and state authorities. So I was interested in, taking a look at the grassroots level, so at the parish priest and their parishioners. So basically, I talked to parish priests or other priests who are in the parish, because as you know, there could be more than one priest in one parish, and also to the parish people. And it was very important for me to really interview those parishioners who self-recognize, who self-profess themselves as being parishioners, and also whom the priest is recognized as his parishioner. Because in Ukraine, we don't have this clear-cut membership in the Orthodox churches, so practically everyone who feels like it can self-identify as parishioner. So my intention was to study grassroots level, this rank and file members of the church, and also this church regulars. I mean, those church attendants who, attend the services, participate in the life of the parish community on a daily basis. So that was the main two groups with whom I spoke, parish priests and their parishioners.
And were they very open to talk to you about their current problems and challenges?
No, they were not. And the funny thing about it, so I have conducted overall 27 in-depth interviews. And also I have, I call them unrecorded conversations. So I have 12 unrecorded conversations. So these 12 people were not very open. They were afraid that if I record them, that I might betray him in the future and publish this recording somewhere, and that might get them in trouble or something. So they were not very open. And in the process of recruiting people to get interviews with them, I received so many rejections, and people initially were very open and says, yes, we're going to do that. That's very important topics you want to raise. And then all of a sudden, at some point, they text me something like, all those things that you want to discuss with us, it's all about politics, and we don't want to, meddle with politics and have nothing to do with politics. So probably will not discuss anything with you. So yeah, something like that.
So
So many of them were not quite open.
let's have a closer look to those discussions with the parish priests and the lay people. What are they afraid of? What do you mean with politics?
Wow, what they're afraid of. I mean, first thing that we should understand about these people is that they're, well, it's hard to say, but they're traumatized by the current pressure and current public disapproval that they face in their daily life. So they simply don't trust anyone. Anyone who is outside of their community, outside of their everyday interactions, etc. So they're afraid that they might be betrayed. They're afraid that they might be misinterpreted, misquoted afterwards, or represented as backwards or stupid or pro-Russia, having pro-Russia sentiments or something like that. So they were mainly afraid of this thing. And another thing that many of them said was something like, probably that's important to discuss this sort of issues, but we are sure that it won't change a thing, that nothing would change because of your research. And this research is not about, protecting the church, advocating the church agenda or something like that. So probably there's no point in discussing it because it won't change a thing. So that's why we don't want to participate in it. And the politics, this concept of politics that they use when we were discussing many things with them, it was very, a very broad thing. So basically, when the word politics resurfaced in our conversations, it was mostly about indicating some parts of life of society they don't want to have anything to do with. So, for example, if I ask them what they think about their church connections to Russia or to Moscow Patriarchate, many of them label this particular part of our discussion as politics. So we here in our parish, we pray to God, and it doesn't matter what the relationship our church leaders has with Moscow Patriarchate. So that is politics. Or when we discuss, introduction of more Ukrainian language into the church services, many of them says that this discussion about language is about politics. So it's politics. We don't want to discuss it because it has nothing to do with praying to God and, seeking salvation or something like that. So that was a very broad concept that they use. And I take it as being some sort of a defensive strategy. So they understand that they are being they're seen by the society as as pro-Russia, as not reliable, as not Ukrainians enough, and they simply want to disentangle themselves from this complex discussions about the Ukrainian language, links to Russia, all this sort of stuff. So they use this concept of politics to symbolically protect themselves, to distance themselves from this discussions they don't want to be part of. So that's probably the idea.
You mentioned this, yeah, quite very bad image of the believers of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church as being pro-Russian or even backwards, and described a little bit this defensive strategy. Would you say it's like a kind of going in an inner exile to distance from everything outside the church, or could you describe it a little bit more? What means this strategy of distancing of everything outside the church?
Yeah, I mean, it's not only from everything outside of the church, and so it's like in many ways it's about escapism. Yeah, just to don't think about what's going on and simply praying to God, simply focusing on rituals, on your faith, something like that. So it was very interesting how they crafted this idea that what they do in the church, it's only about religion. And religion for them is only about prayer, only about faith, and nothing else. So that's what one thing. And it was not only about this outside things that's happening, this discussion, this images, etc. It was also about the relations within the church itself. So many of them tried to distance themselves also from their bishops and from the church leaders, disagreeing sometimes with what they say, what they do, the way they say, the way they do. So they try to say that we have nothing to do with them, with what they do as well. So not simply with that people from outside doesn't like us and the society at large doesn't like them, and we try to distance ourselves from them, but also to distance ourselves from the church leaders because what they do we also disagree with, and and many of them saw their bishops as being pro-Russia or indirectly pro-Russia, whatever. So they wanted to stress it in our conversation that they really has nothing to do with that. So they try to create this image that they only about religion, and religion was about faith in God and prayer and participation in parish community. So that was their strategy. That I think it's a deliberate approach to protect themselves, from accusations, etc.
You mentioned this inner church relationships. What do your interview partners identify as main problems of their church, and have they some suggestion to change in the future, or what could be changed in the future that the church could reach maybe a better image? Or
There were two basic answers to this question because I really was interested in what they see as possible solution to alleviate this public pressure. And there were two answers, basically. One saying that there is no point, there's no need to change anything because society is not ready to listen. So there's no need to try to court the society, to try to adapt to anything. It won't help. Another part of the answers was we have a list of changes that we should do. Firstly, it was about, making bishops more accountable because, bishops are being elected, they've been appointed by the church leaders without any consultations with the parishes, with the parish priests, etc. So there was this idea that bishops should be more accountable to the parish communities. And also there were ideas that we should, our church should come up with a better communication strategy, because we don't have the view from inside of the church on Ukrainian media, etc. So we need to find a way to make society listen to us. So to create a communication strategy, improve communications, all this sort of stuff. And also there were people who were basically saying that probably it is desirable to introduce a little bit more Ukrainian language in the church services, because the specific dialect of church Slavonic language that they currently use in their communal prayers during the liturgy, the prayers, etc., it has this Russian pronunciation, or the pronunciation that was heavily influenced by the Russian Empire once upon a time. And many people who don't, well versed in the church matters or in theology, they might think that there's some version of Russian language that they pray, and it creates tension. So some of them thought that it would be desirable to introduce more Ukrainians. But then again, many of them, I mean, in this second basic answer, they have listed, this list of changes we should do, and then they, like summarize them, but it won't help anyway, because the society is not ready to listen to us. So basically this feeling of the sentiment about pessimistic feelings like were overwhelming. And it doesn't matter with whom I spoke, many of them came up with this idea that whatever we do, it doesn't matter, the society doesn't listen to us. Even those who had some plans what should be done in order to alleviate this pressure, they were like very, very, very pessimistic that it might change something in the future, and improve the image of their church in the Ukrainian society.
What is your main takeaway from this study? Were you surprised by this very pessimistic sentiment?
Well, I can say that I was surprised by this. It was like obvious that they would be pessimistic, because I myself see no way how they could improve the image of their church in the Ukrainian society. So whenever you hear something about Moscow Patriarchate in Ukrainian media or anywhere in Ukraine, it means something bad. It means it's so discredited. I see no reason, no way how they could improve it. At the same time, what really surprised me, was that these arguments that they used, these explanations that they came up with in the course of our interviews, they were like, there was nothing new in them. I mean, so when we discuss the introduction of the Ukrainian language, or the veneration of some problematic saints, like, Russian statesmen and military figures like Tsar Nicholas II or Prince Alexander Nevsky, whom this church still venerates as saints. So basically the explanation these people gave me why they still do this, or why they don't want the Ukrainian language to be introduced, or why they don't want to transfer to some other church, to this other Orthodox Church of Ukraine, etc. It was the same arguments that they gave to other researchers earlier, before the war started, or even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So it seems, at least from what I've studied, from what I saw, from what I listened to, that the way they see the world around them, and the way they think they should interact with this world, hasn't changed. Despite of the Russian invasion, it's still the same arguments they have, the still same explanations they have, and it's very strange. So I thought that I would encounter something new, some new explanations, some new narratives, but there was the same thing that other researchers saw earlier. And another thing that is really interesting is about that, I never thought about it before this, many of these interviewees brought up in our conversation, was this complex image of what it means to be pro-Russian. Because, this church is being viewed by the society at large as being pro-Russia organization. Obviously, it's not monolithic, it's not, homogeneous, and so many different opinions exist in this church. But at the same time, when you talk with these church members, with the priests and parishioners, so the people from inside of this church, many of them agree that they are like what they label as being as pro-Russia people in our church. And I always try, whenever they came up with this concept, pro-Russia people, I always compel them to explain what it means to be pro-Russia in the church. And many of them gave me different explanations. So basically, one parishioner, for example, described pro-Russia people in his parish as those who, undermine the very fact that there's been a war between Russia and Ukraine, saying something that it's not Russian rockets or Russian missiles hitting Kyiv, for example, but it's Ukrainians themselves, do this. So there was one part. Another one brought up this very funny explanation that pro-Russia people, are those who, still want to be part of the Russian church. So they condemn Putin. They don't support Russian aggression, but they still want to be together in this church that began in the 10th century with the Moscow Patriarchate as its head. So they consider them being pro-Russia. And there was one funny thing, really funny thing, that one priest told me that, in his view, pro-Russia people are those who, despise the West and think that West is godless and it's violates Christian, it abandoned Christian principles, Christian teaching behind it. It's, going straight to hell. And Russia, despite of its awful leader at the moment, is still trying to uphold the Christian values. And so in the long run, we should be together with Russia because we're protecting Christian values against the godless West. So this image who are pro-Russia people are very, very, very complex. And, sometimes it seemed to me when I talk to these people that they try to blame every problem in their church on this mysterious pro-Russia people. That is why this concept is so complex. So when one parishioner explained to me why his parish refused to introduce more Ukrainian language in the liturgy, he basically said it's because of this pro-Russia people. They doesn't want them. Another one was explaining why his church is still not transferred to this Orthodox Church of Ukraine, because we have this pro-Russia people, they don't understand anything, etc. So, this pro-Russia people were always there's a scarecrow that they have to explain all the problems.
One last question, Andriy. In August last year, this meanwhile famous controversial new law on religious organization connected to Russia were adopted. And in May, we will see, I think, the first effects of this law. What are your expectations concerning the law and in general for the future of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church?
Well, let's begin with this law because it's very important to explain it. This law doesn't say that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church would be, banned right after this allocated time period. So in May, nothing happens actually. So it's not like the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, this UOC, would be banned overnight after this law came into force. So basically what this law says, that should the state establish that this church has relations to Russia, this church should be banned. But the problem is that UOC, like any other religious organization in Ukraine, according to law, is not just one legal entity. So we have not one legal entity called UOC, but we have 10,000 different legal entities, so 10,000 parishes, and then 200 monasteries, seminaries, newspapers. So all the technically separate, independent legal entities. So what it means, that according to this law, that the state should conduct a real in-depth study into each of this legal entity to find out if they really have these links to Russia. And the problem is that I doubt that the state really has the resources to do this, because it really requires, so one of the provision in this law is that this religious community could be disbanded if they propagate Russian words. So this ideology of Russian word. But the definition of this ideology in this law is so broad, so it could be practically anything. So if some expert, happens to come in one of the parish and see, for example, the icon of Tsar Nicholas II, according to this legislation, he might or she might came to this conclusion that this is the propaganda of the Russian world. So the definition is too broad. This law requires lots of efforts, lots of expertise, lots of resources that Ukrainian state doesn't have at the moment. So I really don't see how they are going to really implement this legislation. So I presume that probably when this allocated time periods expires and in May, that they would probably, I mean, the state Service for Ethnopolitics and Freedom of Conscience, so this governmental agency that is responsible for this religious affairs. So probably after this time period came to an end, they probably will try to force the church leaders to somehow publicly pronounce that they are no longer members of the Russian church or Moscow Patriarchate or whatever, because I really don't see where they could find the resources, where they could find money, where they could find so many experts to conduct so many expertises all across Ukraine, especially in these terrible situations that we are in because of the war, because we don't have like lots of resources, you know, to spend on this. So probably it would be some clash with church leaders, and then again, it also depends on the political will. It might sound very banal, but still, we don't know what would happen with the current administration, so with the current government. So probably if there would be elections, as you know, our partners from behind these beautiful oceans demand, so probably the new government would be not so much interested in, you know, actually implementing this law. So it seems to me that we have this legislation. It's like very severe, very restrictive, but it still requires lots of resources to actually implement it. And I think it would be like a very powerful leverage that the state would have at their disposal in this cooperation or conversation with the URC. So probably they won't even implement it, but they would like, you know, in their dialogue with this church, there would like be it would be like an additional argument in the state's pocket to say, please do this, otherwise we would implement this legislation, or please do that, otherwise we'll implement this legislation. So probably it would work like that, you know, to get some concessions from this church, to, you know, gradually force it to distance from Russia even more, or force it to eventually to transfer or to unite with or to merge with these other Orthodox Church of Ukraine, because I really doubt the state has resources and that would be having this political will to really implement it as it is written in this legislation. But at least it seems like this at the moment.
Thank you, Andriy, for this very interesting conversation and your insights in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and all the best to you in Kiev.
Thank you.